drilling into what steps we should be taking as organisations to assess that risk, put strategies in place to mitigate it, control it, and go from there. And I really appreciate you guys coming in with your experience. Yep, we tried this, it didn't work. We tried this, it did work. We're finding this helpful. That'd be absolutely brilliant to get that, get that feedback if we could. So very quickly, we're talking about e-mobility strategy. So what's e-mobility? Many of us have been struggling dealing with mobility scooters for a long time. But of late, we of course are seeing a much larger number of e-bikes and e-scooters, hoverboards, other light electric vehicles, personal mobility devices, or electric powered personal vehicles, various acronyms that are used by different parties. So that's what we're talking about. Why do we need a strategy? I think, and you guys would know this better than me, but I think one of the key things is because we've got to balance some quite difficult, conflicting points of view. Resident safety does come first, and the fire risk associated with these is significant. But we've also got to think about the residents and the health and well-being and why they may be needing these devices. It might be they've got limited mobility, and it's their physical independence, and it might be people that are using them to get to work, e-bikes and so forth. That definitely happens. So financial independence. The government is pushing decarbonisation of our transport system, if you like, very strongly, and as such are not really taking on board the fire risk aspect. But we've got to, because it's our responsibility as landlords to keep our residents safe. But that's the tone, that's the direction of travel, if you'll excuse the pun, and that's the sort of background to this, and that's why I think we need strategies in place, because there's no one easy answer. Ban them, how easy that would be, but that's not an option, that really I don't think. So that's why we need a strategy. Another reason is the number of incidents are increasing exponentially. There's some data, global data on the left-hand side there, which shows that the number of fatalities doubled from 2022 to 2023, and that's been a typical pattern year on year. There have been at least 13 fatalities in the UK since 2020, and almost 200 injuries, incidents occurring nearly every day, and widely acknowledged to be the fastest growing fire risk that we're facing in the country at the moment. So not something that we can ignore. And I think even statistically, or however you want to describe it, the risk of that of an incident occurring in one of our own buildings must be increasing every day. So that's the sort of background, that's the context to this. The problem at the root of this, of course, is lithium-ion batteries. More and more devices have been fitted with them. They're a great power source, compact, etc. But the fact that you've got so much energy in a small space does mean that they're sensitive to damage through overheating, puncturing, etc. And they can then go into this thing called thermal runaway, which is a rapid release of a toxic and explosive vapor cloud, not gas, as it says there, which is usually, not always, but usually followed by a fire and or an explosion. Now, this happening in our living rooms, because that's what lots of people are charging their devices, is of course a potentially catastrophic event. Does it apply to all lithium batteries? Well, actually, yes, it does in some shape or form. It can be due to poor quality, that sort of thing, but it can also be misuse. You'll have seen that it's happened to phones, laptops, and that sort of thing. But personal mobility devices are a much higher risk for several reasons. One is that the sale of those products is uncontrolled, so that lots of poor quality products come into the market. The second is that they are vulnerable to damage. Think of scooters crunching down curbs, battery sort of mounted in the bottom of it, for example. And thirdly, as I said just now, we charge them indoors. We don't charge cars indoors generally. Those sort of things that although they're bigger and that it would be a much bigger event, they're not occurring in the same regularity by any means. So that's the lithium ion thing. I think as a sector, we're quite at risk with residents on low income, with reduced mobility, the food delivery riders, all these things that I guess you guys come across quite a lot in your buildings. And then, of course, we've got overcrowding and lack of suitable storage. So there's a number of reasons why, we're sort of exposed to this. So that's my summary on background. If anybody's got any thoughts or anything to add to that, got anything in the chat there, Ed? Not yet. Guys, if you want to stick your hand up, got any thoughts on that? Feel free. Otherwise, we'll start looking at the plan. Now, what I've been looking at is the steps that we need to put in place. This will all be common activities for you guys, I have no doubt. But what I really want to do is provoke discussion, debate, views, experience shared by sort of going through it in this way. Bit primitive, but that's the steps we're looking at. Assessing the risk, then increasing awareness, trying to manage the risk, and then possibly looking at putting in a charging infrastructure. Right, go on, Ed.
As I said, I'm going to interrupt every now and then so that people are feel included. Really, so we've got Mike Kelly that said we have banned e-scooters from employees in retail units in their shopping centres. And then Simon Faulkner has said, are there any forthcoming legislation in terms of points of sale?
That's interesting that, Mike, and you're not alone in that. I mean, many of the transport operators, the railways and so forth, they've banned e-bikes and e-scooters on their networks. They are banned from lots of public buildings, and I guess how we apply that in a residential setting becomes quite challenging, doesn't it? Because they've got to go somewhere. And to your point, Simon, there is actually. I was going to come a bit later on to the campaign from Electrical Safety First. Don't know if anybody's come across that, but they are seeking to have a safety bill introduced into Parliament. I wasn't going to talk about politics, but they are anyway. They are campaigning to have controls put on the sale of devices. They've already had some dodgy charging or adapters or something removed from the market. So yes, is a short answer to that. Simon, good, thanks for that. So perhaps we'll start looking at these elements then. Assessing their risk. Now, we've probably got some fire risk assessors, certainly got some fire safety managers, building safety managers on the call. Really interested in your thoughts on this. My first proposition was that if we have an event, a lithium-ion battery thermal runaway event inside a property, the consequences are likely to be catastrophic. The likelihood, we probably at this stage would still say is low, despite what we've just said about the number of incidents. But we don't really know, do we? This is my point, because we don't really know what's in our buildings. We don't really know what might be in the residents' flats, and there's no obligation on us to know, as far as I know. So, guys, what are you doing about that at this point in time? What would you recommend if there's a landlord that hasn't sort of started looking at this yet? What would you do? How have you assessed this risk? Any thoughts on that one?
Nigel, it's Phil here.
Hello, Phil.
We don't allow storage in communal spaces at all. They have to be within a tenant's property. Depending on the building design, we do give advice about safe charging, safe use, safe storage. And there's other fire safety measures in place in some of those properties, like a heat detector or something like that, depending on the building design. But the general principles is can't store it in a communal space, can't charge it in a communal space. You just can't leave it there. We'll remove it. But it depends what it is. That's easy to do with a scooter, like a two-wheeled scooter, but a mobility scooter, there's far more engagement. And we do have some bespoke built, what we would call safe charging rooms under lease. That's pretty much what we do.
That's really helpful. No, thank you for that, Phil. And I'm glad you've made that sort of distinction between the common areas and the residents' flats, because yeah, there's already, clearly, as you say, there's already guidance around not charging in communal areas. That's been there for a while, and most people follow that. Everybody, I guess, is familiar with the NFCC guidance. If you can get it within the flat without obstructing escape routes, preferably in a behind a fire door, not in the immediate sort of living quarters, then great, but definitely not in common areas. But I sort of feel that the whole lithium ion thing has sort of taken it to another level, and anything like that within a flat is a threat, to be honest. If they've got lithium ion battery, and of course you could inspect. You could say, well, has this device? If there's somebody's got a mobility scooter, it's got it stored in their flat. Well, we can do an individual risk assessment on that. We can do an inspection on that and make, is it in reasonably good condition? Is it maintained? Has the battery or charger been changed? There are things we can do to mitigate that risk, which we'll come to again in a minute. So thank you for that. Who have we got now?
Well, we've got a few. I think there's someone with their hands up, apart from me. So maybe start with them, and then we can look at some of the chat, or you can look at some more of the chat once you've done a bit more of the presentation. Up to you.
Marta, do you want to go first?
Yeah, very quickly. I just wanted to say, in sheltered housing, we know where the scooters are, and we do have a policy. They can't actually be stored in communal areas, and we have now managed to get all the scooters out of all those communal corridors, because the people were charging them through the front door, as somebody's mentioned. Now, for us, the problem is compliance, because we do have the facilities, but it's very difficult for somebody who has got mobility issues to sometimes say, well, you need to put the scooter in the shed, in the scooter shed, which is provided for you, where you can safely charge it outside the building. But actually, because their mobility is so poor, they take, oh, well, I'll just bring it in, drop my shopping, and they'll put it back, and then they don't. So actually, it's a question of actually keeping on with compliance, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult because we also have a relationship with these very vulnerable adults. But we realize that the risk is actually very high for us. So
yeah, no, thank you for that. That's really helpful. And I think there's a couple of things come to mind. One is trying to make them as accessible and easy to use as you can within, obviously, the constraints of the site. And I've forgotten what the other one was now, but that's great. Good point. Angela, do you want to go next?
Hi, actually, just following on from the last point as well, because I also work for a social housing landlord, and our policy allows Cat 2s in the property and Category 3s not. The bigger schemes do have dedicated places, but even the biggest issue for us is with compliance, because if someone then tells you they're not doing it, the only means we can really take action against them is via the courts, and that's not a quick solution. So any other ideas or any other good practices that people are using, because it's a tricky one, because some of the older buildings are not designed to have even space for Cat 3 outside, and they can be stolen. So yeah.
No, you raised some very good points there, Angela. Yes, you've reminded me what I was going to say. Was Marta and yourself both made the same point, really, about if they're not accessible enough, then they don't use them. If we keep making people more, which is the second section here, on more aware of the risks, then hopefully they will they will see why it's necessary. But yeah, for most of the part, they just see it as you're just making life difficult for them, which is really, really frustrating. Tracy, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, So I work in sheltered housing for the local authority for Dudley. I'm here in place of Chris Shepherd. So we've got the same sort of policy in terms of like not charging or storing in communal areas, and that's fine while there's a member of staff on site that can police it. But if we're not on site 24/7, so it's about how you can make people safe when there's not anybody on site. What we have done, we've shown tenants videos of mobility scooters going up in flames to reiterate the seriousness of it, because like you say, they just think, oh, it's just a mobility scooter, but You know, they don't realise how serious that the fires can be so quickly with them.
Yeah, exactly. No, thank you, Tracy. That's really helpful. Mark, do you want to come in there?
Right, you can hear me now, can you?
Yep, come on.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, just Tracy's covered that really, what I was going to say, but you can put, we can all put various solutions into place, and we can try our best policies, fireproofing, but there's the old adage, you can take a horse to water, in a lot of cases, and that scenario will raise its head. So really, as Tracy was saying, I think communication is essential. Just making people visually aware and actually aware of the fallout and the actual cost of a scooter fire in a scenario which it shouldn't happen in, and whether that's just coffee mornings or getting the fire brigade involved, or having some pretty poignant slides, aftermath, things like that. And I think that does help. That really does help, because it does bring it home. I know it does, because speaking to quite a few of the residents where I work at a housing association, it does have an effect, but it's difficult. It's really difficult.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I like your point there about involving the fire and rescue service, because I think we can do a lot more with those guys by working together, and we'd be very keen to facilitate that as well. For instance, something with the authority for the county, and then a number of landlords in the area actually getting together and sort of doing a campaign, I think could help that. But I think you're right. I think it is the awareness. What do you think of this fourth point I've put on here about an anonymous reporting line? Because people are probably not going to self-declare, are they? Or a lot of people won't. Certainly if you've got a dodgy e-bike that you've built yourself, you're probably not going to self-declare. But the point is, it's not just these guys and their what's going on in their lives. It's the safety of the residents in the building. It's the safety of all the other residents. So my point there, I think, is if everybody's aware of this risk, and you say, look, we don't know what's in people's flats. If you see someone coming in and out with a dodgy device, tell us. You don't even have to tell us who you are. Just tell us. What do you guys think of that? And there's probably some things on the chat there I haven't seen. Do you want to bring them in, Ed?
Yeah, there was one there. I mean, I'm certain there's loads of stuff on here, but there's just something interesting here from Daniel Pott. He says, we are putting in a new policy in place for mobility scooters, which includes a permissions-based process, which automatically generates the PCFRA process. I'm interested to hear if any providers are allowing storage in garden areas that are within 6 meters of the building, but with an agreement that batteries have to be removed and charged within their residence. Appreciate not all scooters have removable batteries.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think I have come across people doing that, but yeah, does anybody want to come in with their thoughts or experience on that? Does it work?
Hello, it's Tracy here. So yeah, just to say that we've recently had quite a battle with one of the tenants that was storing consistently not taking the scooter into his flat, and it was on the fire risk assessment. So we have actually, although it is within 6 meters of the property, he's now agreed, and he is complying, and he'll store it outside with a waterproof cover on it. So although it's not the best, it's mitigated it from storing it in the communal and in his flat, and it's outside. So although there's still a risk there, it's reduced the risk greatly. And like I say, he's conforming now, so we're sort of happier with that.
Yeah, that's good, Tracy. Thank you. And I think you're right. You're not necessarily going to eradicate every risk, but if we can work to reduce that steadily, then we're moving in the right direction, aren't we? Mark, do you want to come again?
Yeah, just follow on again from Tracy. It is, as we all know, it's 6 meters guidance, isn't it? It is.
Yes.
It is guidance, so it's not hard and fast. So I think providing that you use common sense, and you also again make the individual aware that they're on board. I think in most cases you can come to an acceptable solution in most cases. But we've got it's a good guideline, 6 meters. I think it's great. But we've got a a program at MHA where we've got storage units, and we have used some of the gardens after consultation, and I do believe that there've been some people just won't use them, get the odd one or two, but in most cases we're still rolling it out. We've got a program there which and I am a fire risk assessor, and I see they're being used, and I think once one or two people start using them, people, word gets round and they get in the habit, and it is successful.
Yeah, it's good. I like Marta's got a comment there about asking users to sign a document agreeing to keep to the procedures when they get a scooter. That's something we'll pick up a bit later. And most of the responses obviously we've got on the moment are mostly about mobility scooters. Has anybody started, addressing the e-bike aspect of this yet? Got any thoughts on that? You have? Pop it in the chat. Go on, Tracy.
Yeah, so it's me again. So we've got a number of carers that come into the sheltered schemes that are whizzing around on the scooters, the electric scooters, to get from one call to another. So we've said they're not allowed to bring those into the buildings.
Mm. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Okay, last point I've got on here about is whether we find that fire risk assessors are applying a consistent sort of approach. I mean, anybody's got any views on that? As Mark says, it is most of the things around this are guidance. It does come down to an individual risk assessment. Any thoughts on that at all?
I don't know about that. There's Mike Kelly has mentioned at the bottom there that he feels there needs to be a guidance on developing a 4-hour fire resistance internally. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm not saying that would be set in stone. The point I'm trying to make is you're quite right. You go around, you do your risk assessments on certain places, and if it's not just about the e-scooters, it could be storage of lithium batteries in a particular area. The problem is there is no guidance on what you can tell them to do, because the problem with lithium ion is it's not like a normal fire behind a fire-rated fire door. It'll develop and it will burn the contents within there. What lithium battery will do is it will start to go into thermal runaway, and depend on the output and the energy of the battery, you're going to get a significant fire with possible vapor cloud explosion. So I don't hear anybody having a conversation about possibly where you cannot meet the requirement or the guidance, as you quite rightly say. I've not seen anybody talk about when we have this explosive risk, we should have an explosive vent. It should be on an external wall. These things should be stored in those types of areas, a bit like a high risk area that we have. We should be treating them like that, because there's no guidance when a risk assessor, well, where shall I store them? Where do you store them? I mean, and you're quite right. The problem here, it's not like in Japan where they'll leave all their storage outside because no one steals. But we're talking about thousands of pounds for each of these individual bikes and such like, and there's no chance. And obviously, the other thing is the powerful explosion that we see in some of the videos are breaking through the walls of some of these buildings, especially if you're in a timber frame building. I wasn't so sure about that. So it's very difficult. I'm not saying that's an answer at all, but we might have to be thinking about bespoke areas where you put an envelope around it, you put a bespoke sprinkler or a bespoke water misting to mitigate that damage, to avoid fire spread and such like, because it is a problem that you're quite right. An individual with one of them is either going to put it inside their apartment, or they tend to leave it stored outside, which I know there are a few mitigating circumstances there that have been highlighted, identified to the residents, correct, but it's coming more and more, and it's just difficult to find anything that's telling us what guidance to follow, really. If you don't have the option to put them elsewhere, what do you do with them?
Yeah, no, Mike, you're really hitting the nail on the head there. I think there is a bit in the advice from the London Fire Brigade, which I'll touch on at the end. But you're absolutely right. There's no firm guidance yet on lithium ion, because we still don't really know how it behaves, apart from savagely lots, like really lots. But yeah, as you say, going straight through plasterboard and the things that we would normally expect to be fire resistant, needs a completely different approach. Mark, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, only when I've been out with the fire authority where I work, we went to a shelter scheme where we had an issue with scooters, and I know the one thing and what Mike was saying just earlier, he's right. If sometimes it's so difficult what to do, so having a bespoke design to cater for a particular fire risk, what could happen, it's really difficult, and it can go on forever. But the one thing the fire brigade said to me, and it just stuck with me, he said, if it's outside, it'll burn off. If it's inside, it won't.
Yeah.
And that's at the end of the day, that's the biggest thing. If you can get it outside, if that catches fire and it's outside, it's not going to, the fumes, the gases, the smoke, the intensity, you've got a chance. If it's in the premises, all right, you're it's a different scenario. Outside, the walls might break or whatever, but
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, and you've got more chance. People will see it. It's not confined inside a building. It really is a different level. But again, Mike, it's as Mike said, it's difficult. It's really difficult, but outside every time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the current policies a lot are based around the way mobility scooters have been with lead acid batteries for the last 20 years or so. But the lithium ion thing, as I said before, takes it to a completely different level. As we got sort of stuck into that, I might just for a moment drop on to the London Fire Brigade advice. This fire guidance note GM 103 is well worth having a look at if you're not familiar with it. I've just sort of summarised the requirements around storage, and so they're saying very clearly, wherever possible, if we've got such devices, we want to get them in an external location. Obviously, it's then got to be secure for security reasons. Where it's not achievable, the internal space can be used, but it needs a full compartmentation, not directly linked to means of escape, automatic detection, suppression, smoke extraction, and just touching on Mark's point, the need for enhanced structural fire protection. We don't really know what that is because of the way that a lithium ion, the way these thermal runaway things behave. But they've recognised that, and so what they're saying is, the current guidance and everything doesn't meet and it's not going to stand up to a lithium ion event. So I just wanted to reinforce that point that Mike and you made there, Mark. Yeah. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'm
just going to interrupt really quickly.
Yeah, go on.
Sorry,
yeah, go on,
Nigel.
Yeah.
Stop me if I'm doing this too much, but
No,
I just feel like it's worth mentioning the conversation going on in the chat at the moment, particularly with Steve Shelley talking about having to police asking proof for of his residence, proof for servicing and insurance. So because obviously the state of the vehicle is very important, and people are asking a lot about that. How do you police that kind of evidence? It seems very relevant to me.
Yeah, that's good. And was Emma looking to come in there just now? Do you still want to come in, Emma?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to structural issues are certainly something that to be considered. We have youth services where a lot of the residents are in the gig economy, using the scooters for work, and it's looking at how we can store those scooters and e-bikes safely, looking at possibilities of external storage. Again, as the gentleman said before, those very valuable items for those people. It's so you're also looking at security, keeping them away from the building, but also education. When you have individuals that don't have English as a first language, how do you provide that training to make sure they really understand? Monitoring what's going on in the HMOs and the youth service, seeing what equipment they're charging. Is it dodgy stuff that electrical safety first would say shouldn't even be available? So it's about going in, checking what they're using, checking what they're charging, how they're charging it. Is it in a safe place away from the escape routes, increased detection? Doing what you can within what you've got. And it differs from the different client groups. So if you're in specialised housing, you may be looking at other issues. HMOs another issue, and general needs where you don't get so much access unless you do type 3s and going in and checking the fire doors. You might see then that someone's got a gifter inside. You can have that conversation then, but it is looking at all the different types of residents and all the types of blocks and how you can manage that with what you've got.
Yeah, great point, Sarah. No, I completely agree. And yeah, and how many of the delivery riders do you see with a bike like this? Batteries sort of taped on, extra batteries, just like absolute nightmare, disaster waiting to happen. A lot of the increasing awareness has already sort of come out of our discussions. Just this last point, one thing that struck me at CIH Brighton a couple of weeks ago was the intratone message panels inside the flat doors, inside the flat blocks, inside the access points. I don't know if you guys use them. I know some have used them for putting recycling information, but if you were to put this fire safety information on there, and there's a you can collect survey data, so they could say, do you know of any in this building? And it could be yes, no. They could just tap yes, no. That sort of thing where you're putting information out, but you're also gathering feedback in a very low non-confrontational sort of way. So that's just a thought I had on that. I don't know if you guys have done anything like that. So that's probably it on the increasing awareness. So managing risk, again, quite a lot of this we've covered. Compulsory registration, inspection, testing, insurance. I think this is so important. So I don't think people are going to self-declare, they're not going to self-regulate, but I think if we increase the awareness across the whole, across all the residents, then I think, we can start to put something in place that, well, it's difficult, you can't do it because of this, you can't do it because of that, but somehow we've got to find a way, because these really are massive risks if they're, to the extent. But I suppose the worst case scenario, what is the worst case scenario? It's probably a flat which is in multiple occupation, which you may not even know about. We've heard of some where there was like 30 people in with sort of 7 or 8 e-bikes all charging up, homemade e-bikes. So we have to find a way, because it's not just those residents and that flat and their responsibility, it's the implications of the residents and the rest of the building, I feel. One point on inspection testing, it will reduce the risk. Clearly it will reduce the overall risk, but it is only an inspection at a point in time, and there could be damage going on inside a battery which you can't see until it starts swelling, that sort of thing, and it's very close at that point to actually going into thermal runaway. So that could happen, the day after it's inspected. But at least if you've got a process in place, we're reducing it. Yeah, and if you do come across them, then what are we going to do? We've got to come up with a strategy for that. I mean, I think any homemade devices, if they don't pass an inspection, they have to be removed. It's going to affect their livelihood. Well, maybe we can come up with a plan that they can rent a bike or something. I don't know. We need to be creative about this, I think. Tenancy, that also came up just now. I mentioned this before. We did have a very interesting webinar last year with Devonshire's on exactly this subject. And there were quite a number of clauses in existing conditions of tenancy which you could use around sort of antisocial behaviour and that type of thing, the responsibility that residents, tenants have. Not my subject, but certainly worth having. We've got it on our library of webinars. There's a download there. Certainly worth having a look at that, or getting in touch with, taking legal advice on that, I think.
Hi, Nigel.
Yes.
Sorry, could we draw Martin Fraser in his comment about informing the local fire service where flats or residents have got a PMD, personal mobility device, within their flat? That would also relate to where you've got one that's homemade or something like that. If anybody's got any thoughts on contacting the local fire service.
Yeah, it's good point. Any more to say on that, Martin, or anyone else?
We're looking at reviewing the PCFRA process for the housing association that I'm working with, and part of that is to identify where we have vulnerable residents, but also where they have particular fire risks, which the fire service should be aware of when they're going into the building. So one of those would be, if we identify through all the various ways that we can identify residents if they are keeping any of these devices, and particularly if they're not storing them or charging them safely. We can give the advice, but also it's important that the fire service are aware. So if they turn up, they can see very quickly where the flat is, which or flats are that have these devices in place, and then they can respond accordingly to that. So yeah, we're talking about putting in a resident information form into the premises information boxes on our buildings, so that information is there for the fire service.
Yeah, that's really important. Yeah, great point. Thank you for bringing that in. Good. So looking at safe charging infrastructure, we've as you know, that's what we do. We've covered this in a lot of detail before, but the questions that often seem to come up are about the cost, whether and how we recover that cost, because it is significant. I'm interested how you guys apply that. Do you charge residents for it? Charge users for the provision of storage, provision of electricity, or how do you guys do that? I mean, I think you should, to be honest. I know the mechanisms can be quite convoluted, but you'd pay to rent a garage. Anybody would. So why shouldn't you pay to rent a scooter garage, for want of a better term? I also think there's an equity sort of side to it. If you do it for free, actually all the residents are then paying for it, aren't they? And they're not all benefiting from that service. And I think that if somebody makes that decision to buy a mobility scooter for whatever reason, then they need to know that, hey, there is going to be a charge for the provision of storage, £5 a week, whatever it is. They need to know that, because that's part of the deal. Difficult to apply retrospectively, maybe, but certainly something I think that's, should be built into future plans. Anybody got any views on that?
I mean, just reading off the chat, people are seem to be charging kind of £5 a week. Seems like a normal thing to do. I mean, we've spoken to loads of people, and see, just advising a charge like this seems to be far more sensible than trying to actually meter it in any sense. So it seems that people are on board with that.
Yeah, just course the electricity usage, that's the metering side, and the capital cost. The other thing I think it does is also introduces it forces that question: do you really need it? Because if you do, there is this, there is going to be this extra cost. So it creates a little bit of a barrier. No, perhaps I don't actually, or you keep it and you don't use it anymore, but it's still there and it's still taking up a space. Did I say there? Is that Dave? But do you want to come in there, Dave?
Yeah, in Bristol, Bristol City Council, we introduced a permit scheme, so we knew where the scooters were, and what we did charge-wise, we just someone worked out what the electric usage was for charging these scooters on annually, and we set up, the residents set up a direct debit and paid monthly for, but I think at the time it worked out about £100 a year what it would cost to charge a scooter at the time, and we residents,
sorry,
they might keep switching off, a nominal fee. So a nominal fee. So that's what we did. We didn't charge for the building, but what we tried to do was actually, when we were introducing stores inside buildings and some were garages, we tried to minimize what it cost to set that up, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
To had, but obviously we're gone into another world now where we're having to look external and maybe build stuff for bikes and stuff. So possibly maybe we might need to look at maybe like you said, maybe a charge for the structure, the rental. Yeah,
I mean, in a sense they don't exactly need to know what it is, do they? I mean, it's I just think it's a rental. I mean, £5 a week, it would take nearly 20 years to pay that off, sort of £5,000 per device, but it's something, and it does mean that it's not completely at your cost, neither is it being borne by other residents that don't pay for that service. That's really helpful, Dave. Thank you.
Could we draw David Pope out and his comment about the cost of electricity is nothing compared to the cost of a fire?
Yeah. Do you want to come in there, Dave?
Yeah, you are right. You are right. And in this new world, I mean, I've got a problem at the moment because we last year created some stores within the building, fire rated stores, but our in-house team who do the electrics are refusing to put electrics in there. So I have got a big problem. So we are having to review and look at other ways and stuff. So we're having to risk assess the ones we've got. And then obviously going forward, we'll have to actually look externally at what we do. But you're all right. You know, the cost of electricity is nothing compared to what it costs of a fire would cost. So you're right.
Yeah, it's good. Any others we're missing, Ed, Ian?
I think we're okay. There's a question that I had actually, just that's been floating around with a few people I've spoken to, is are people for whatever reason going, like some people are going brick built or us, the discussion. So, and it's one that I found quite interesting because most people want to go with us at the end of the day because they think they look nicer, slightly lighter structures, but like visually, but it is still very much a conversation on the table. And I wondered whether that was a conversation that anyone on here is having at the moment.
Yeah, interesting question, Ed. I think I saw somebody asking for details of suppliers. Clearly there are different ways of doing it, aren't there? From building a traditional building to looking for something modular. Yeah, if anybody's got any thoughts on why they might use one in a certain location, something else in a different location, yeah, be interested to share that.
We've got Phil wants to chat as well.
Phil?
Yeah, it was sort of on the previous thread though, but my only comment was it was about spaces or providing rooms and the charging associated. That's all fine, but sometimes with the buildings we don't have the space, and so we wouldn't also, unfortunately there is an element of not being able to provide full stop, and I sort of was going to throw that into the mix because then you're back to the beginning again of just some basic risk management.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, Phil. And I guess if you follow that through to its conclusion, if you feel that you can manage the risk sufficiently by saying, well, does it have a lithium-ion battery? Are we checking it regularly? That sort of thing, we can manage that and reduce it down. You may get to the point where you say, no, look, I can't act, I'm not happy with this risk, and you may ultimately have to look at actually finding alternative accommodation. I suppose that's, again, another step even further from what you're saying, but that's an excellent point. Dave, do you want to come in there again?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to up the point Edward make. So we've been doing it. We've been creating stores for about 10 years, but the problem we have is cost. It's the cost. The problem being is that we have so many that we have to create, and the actual cost. And the metro stores do look really nice. The problem being is we just don't have the budget for them. It's the problem being is that, especially for, one of the problems we have is the fact that, people have gone out and bought scooters. We haven't asked them to buy it. They've bought it and it becomes our problem. But the problem being is that we don't have large amounts of money to actually sort out this problem in a sense. In the ideal world, it's, giving people individual nice stores, cost money and especially trying to run electrics to it, and stuff. So the problem we have is it was that balancing act towards having to, and that's the problem. I wish, the metro stores were a lot cheaper or could come down, or there was a cheaper alternative you actually provided, which could, because it does make sense, having, and they do look nice, but it's just the cost was the aspect for us, so just wanted really to pitch that out there to you to say, well, we do wanna, but it's just the fact we can't afford to, most of the stores we've done, we've created between, I suppose, storage for, ideally for about 10 scooters. So, we tend to have maybe about 4, 5 or 6 maybe on site, but we tend to create storage for, and it's a hell of a cost when you think about, because it's not just the store, it's the foundation, the base, the whole,
yes,
and then running electricity out there. So sorry, just want to pitch that out there.
It's an important point, Dave. No, you go, you finish.
Sorry. So that was it really. So, didn't have really a preference between, you know, a brick built structure or a timber structure. You know, it was just the fact that it really all just comes down to cost and what was cost effective for us to, you know, to solve a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what it is at the end of the day, isn't it? I mean, from all that we've looked at it from lots of different angles, and my feeling is that it's difficult to do a proper store which is going to comply with the various bits, meet the requirements of a risk assessment, especially if it is closer to the building than 6 meters and that sort of thing. There isn't really a cheap way of doing it. It just doesn't exist unless you guys have found one. So it's more about, well, look, how do we spread that cost? How do we recover that? I mean, we've talked about renting. That would still require you to make an initial investment. But let's say, for example, that we were to lease them to you, then you wouldn't. You know, we could lease them to you and you could be recovering rent and it wouldn't pay for itself all at once, but you're still, you know, you're moving it in the right direction, let's say. So that's certainly a discussion that we could have at some point. So okay. we talked about electrical safety first, just we're right there on the time. Electrical Safety First are going to be joining us for a webinar next month. I think it's the 19th, but look out for an invite for that. That'll be interesting because they've done tons of research. If you look at their website, they've got some really interesting stuff on the lithium ion. As I say, there are three key things: control of sale, safe usage and charging, safe disposal of lithium ion batteries, which isn't something we talked about today, but it is part of their thing. So that's going to be a very interesting one, I think. I mean, this is some of their campaigns. Yeah, do take a look at the London Fire Brigade guidance. And I think that's largely what I had to share. And I really, really appreciate everybody bringing in their experience and sharing that, because that's what this is all about. Thanks so much for joining today. We will circulate information as always, and look forward to seeing you again shortly. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you, everyone. All the best.
Thanks, everyone. If they haven't gone through the chat, then make sure they do, because there's some good stuff on there that we may have missed. Okay.
Yeah, we'll put a little report together. Thank you.